What is good? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. This year's 2024 wide receiver class was very deep, very good for fantasy football. I'm sure you guys have started drafting these players to your Dynasty Fantasy Football teams already in those 2024 rookie drafts. We had 7 first-round wide receivers, like 4 or 5 more in the second round, and plenty more after that. But today's video, what I wanted to do for you is I wanted to give you my top 10 rookie wide receivers now that we have the landing spots, now that we have the context. These are my top 10 wide receivers moving forward. So with that being said, let's not waste any more time. Let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about my first wide receiver. Now coming in as my wide receiver 10, this is where I am going to have Carolina Panthers wide receiver Xavier Legette. He was drafted in the first round. Pick 32 is the draft capital, and Xavier Legette is going into a situation here where he gets to be presumably the number 2 wide receiver for Bryce Young. Now obviously this offseason there have been a head coaching change there in Carolina. It is now Dave Canales, the former offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He is coming over to coach this football team. They traded for Deontay Johnson earlier this offseason as well. And yes, last year they did draft a guy by Jonathan Mingo, which is kind of funny to me because Xavier Legette kind of feels like a Jonathan Mingo type of player. So I don't know if this is them admitting that the old coaching staff picked a bad player and they wanted to get their own version of this type of player. We also have Adam Thielen there, JT Sanders there, Jonathan Brooks now there in Carolina. This is going to be a big part of whether or not Bryce Young can develop at the next level. I think Xavier Legette, he profiles to be this boom bust type of big play wide receiver, while obviously Deontay Johnson is going to profile as the possession wide receiver. It's going to be interesting to see how this works out, but it's hard to knock that type of first round draft capital from a wide receiver in this class. So Xavier Legette, he is going to be coming in as my wide receiver 10 and somebody who I think you should be excited moving forward with on your Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters. Now coming in at my wide receiver 9, this is where I'm going to have Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers. Pearsall was drafted in round 1, pick 31, so just one pick before Xavier Legette, and Pearsall is going into a unique situation here in San Francisco. This is kind of a pick that I feel like a lot of people didn't expect San Francisco to make in this year's draft class. We've heard the rumors, we've heard the rumblings of a potential Brandon Ayuk trade, maybe a potential Deebo Samuel trade. I've heard that they were picking up the phones for both of those guys during the draft, but obviously nothing came to fruition because as of today, the day that I'm recording this, April 30th at about 8:30 p.m., both of these guys are still on the roster. So it feels to me a little bit like Ricky Pearsall is an insurance pick, a very expensive insurance pick, but also a guy that I expect him to take the number 2 role long term, because I do think that the best case scenario for this offense is going to be moving forward with Brandon Ayuk, assuming that he gets that extension, and Ricky Pearsall is the number 2. I can't foresee a guy like Deebo Samuel being here for many more years. I think his time is about done there in San Francisco. He is most likely going to be traded or they will move on from him financially at some point. But it does feel like this is going to be a wait and see type of pick for our Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters, because I don't expect Ricky Pearsall to be very dominant for our teams right away. I think he is more so a year 2 and beyond type of play for our rosters. And that might make some people nervous because that is kind of what Jackson Smith-Njigba was for our rosters last year. I don't think this is necessarily the same situation, but it is somewhat of a similar bet. And obviously with this Pearsall pick, you aren't investing the type of draft capital that you invested in a guy like Jackson Smith-Njigba. So that is why he's going to be coming in as my wide receiver 9, but this is still a player that I'm very excited about moving forward. Now coming in at my wide receiver 8, this is where I have Adonai Mitchell. He was drafted by the Indianapolis Colts. Round 2, pick 20 was the draft capital, and this is a little bit further than we had expected Adonai to get drafted. This is a player that I thought could potentially be drafted in the back half of the first round, potentially a guy who would land in a landing spot like Pittsburgh, maybe even a landing spot like the Buffalo Bills or the Kansas City Chiefs. These were the kind of situations that I felt like Adonai Mitchell would potentially get. And as we got closer to the first round of the NFL draft, there was reports of potential character concerns and some other things that came out about Adonai Mitchell. Now obviously Chris Ballard, the Colts, they go up, they get this guy, and if you ask Chris Ballard, he says it was a mistake. He thinks that Adonai Mitchell should have been drafted much earlier in the NFL draft. So it is good to hear that, but obviously you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt. Now Adonai Mitchell, he's going to be going to an offense here in Indianapolis that we do assume is going to be somewhat run heavy. They do have Jonathan Taylor and they just brought him back on a new deal. Obviously they just re-signed Michael Pittman Jr. and you have Anthony Richardson, their quarterback pick from last year, coming back from injury. But I do think that Adonai Mitchell will fit in as that number 2 wide receiver opposite of Michael Pittman, with Josh Downs playing in the slot. It's just going to be interesting to see where the opportunities come it is going to be something that he is most likely going to have to earn as a rookie. There's really not going to be any easy opportunity for some targets. They're not just going to give him any. He's going to have to earn them from day one. And I think Adonai has the talent to do that. But because it is a little bit of a murkier situation, and because he does have a number one wide receiver like Michael Pittman there, I do think it caps his ceiling just a tiny bit. So he is going to be coming in for me here as my wide receiver 8. Now moving on to my wide receiver 7, this is one of the bigger risers for me in my rankings post-draft. It is going to be Keon Coleman, now of the Buffalo Bills. He goes round 2, pick 1 to the Buffalo Bills. They traded out of the first round and they still got a guy in Keon Coleman here. Now the landing spot itself is one of the best landing spots possible for a rookie wide receiver. I had this as an S tier landing spot coming in, and the reason for that is because 52% of the targets that they threw in 2023 have been vacated. They have walked out the door. Obviously, they have moved on from Stephon Diggs. They have moved on from Gabe Davis. It is now going to be a wide receiver room of Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, and Khalil Shakir. Now, we obviously know they have the quarterback in Josh Allen. We're very excited about all of this stuff. But Keon Coleman, he's a player that I didn't necessarily love coming into this process. I felt like he had some things to work on. He kind of profiles a little bit more as a big slot. So his success is going to be reliant on if they can use him in that role. But he got the draft capital that we wanted. He got the situation that pretty much we wanted every wide receiver to get. This is going to be the perfect storm for Keon Coleman to either perform or not perform. Based on the bet that the Buffalo Bills are making, I'm willing to bet on that as well for my rosters. Like I said, 52% of the vacated targets. Keon Coleman's going to have opportunity day one in this offense, and that's why I'm willing to bet on him. But with that being said, he is still going to be my wide receiver 7 in my rankings. But I think if he hits, he has a very, very, very high ceiling for our fantasy rosters. Now coming in at my wide receiver 6, this is where I have a favorite of mine in this draft process. We are going to have Lad McConkey out of Georgia. He gets drafted by the Los Angeles Chargers, round 2, pick 2. And we talked about that landing spot for the Buffalo Bills being one of the best landing spots from an opportunity standpoint. That remains true as well for the Los Angeles Chargers. Now you look at the depth chart that they have right there in Los Angeles. Quentin Johnston is probably the number 1. He was last year's first round pick for the Chargers. Obviously a different coaching staff, a different regime, but that is what is holding him here as the number 1 option in this depth chart, at least until Lad McConkey walks in the door. Joshua Palmer also there, Darius Davis. There's really not a lot of guys here that we can fully trust. And I think with that being said, Lad McConkey is going to have the ability to be a major difference maker in this offense. And that doesn't even account for the 40% vacated targets that they had this year, obviously moving on from Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Now, 632 passing attempts is what they had in 2023. We don't expect that to be the same under Harbaugh and Greg Roman here in this offense. It will be a new look offense, but you get Lad McConkey, you get Justin Herbert, you pair them together, and in the NFL, you have to throw no matter what. So even if those passing attempts are going to come down, I do think Lad McConkey will be the number 1 option in this offense from a pass catching standpoint. And I think he is going to become Justin Herbert's best friend in this offense. I think he can very well see 120 plus targets as a rookie. And this is a player that I am willing to gamble on, even though the production profile from a college standpoint didn't look fantastic. I still love Lad McConkey for my Dynasty Fantasy Football teams, and that's why he's coming in as my wide receiver 6. Now, at my wide receiver 5, we are going to be talking about Xavier Worthy for the Kansas City Chiefs. And yes, the Kansas City Chiefs, they use a first-round pick on a wide receiver, and it is the wide receiver that we all thought they would potentially go up and get. The Chiefs select him round 1, pick 28. He goes into this offense now where they have Rashee Rice, they have Hollywood Brown, and the other wide receiver there most likely would have been Justin Watson. He is going to complete that trio there. Now, you talk about the passing attempts. 635 passing attempts last year for the Kansas City Chiefs, which was the second most in the NFL. So this is a high volume passing offense, and using a first round pick tells me that they want to use a guy like Xavier Worthy in this offense. Now, there are going to be some question marks about Rashee Rice. How many games is he going to miss? Is he going to miss any games at all? That's something that we don't have much information on right now, but we know that Hollywood Brown, he is on a 1-year deal. So this could very well be a rental for Hollywood Brown in Kansas City. And next year, they could move forward with Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy. I don't even think it's going to have to take until next year for us to see the potential of Worthy. I love this landing spot. Anytime you compare a wide receiver with Patrick Mahomes, I love it as well. Definitely willing to use a late first-round pick on a Xavier Worthy in my drafts. If you did, feel good about it. And like I mentioned, for me, he is currently my wide receiver 5. Now, coming in at my wide receiver 4, it is going to be Brian Thomas Jr. He has been my wide receiver 4 throughout this process. Even pre-draft, I thought he was in a tier of his own as the number 4 wide receiver. He comes off the board as the 4th wide receiver in the NFL draft. He goes round 1, pick 23 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Probably going to be the long-term number 1 for Trevor Lawrence. They've been kind of looking for that guy. Obviously, they also have Christian Kirk. They added Gabe Davis this offseason, but I think this is still a great landing spot for Brian Thomas. He can kind of learn, kind of develop at the NFL level without being needed to do too much day one, just because they do have 2 other guys there that can kind of take the load off of Brian Thomas Jr. But 620 passing attempts last year, 28% of their targets had been vacated. This is going to be a great opportunity for Brian Thomas. And I think he has the ability to become a true number 1, an X type of wide receiver in this offense. A guy that I drafted in multiple places so far. I've even paired him and stacked him with my Trevor Lawrence shares that I have. Feel very good about all of this. I think he is going to be a pick that a lot of people are very happy to make. And also, at least for me, in my experience in a couple of my drafts so far, it does seem like he is kind of falling a little bit more to that 108, 109, 110 type of range. I've even seen him go. So if you can get a slight discount on Brian Thomas Jr., I'm all for it. Like I said, my wide receiver 4 overall in my rookie ranks. And now we got the big dogs coming in as my wide receiver 3. That is going to be Rome Odunze out of Washington. He goes round 1, pick 9 to the Chicago Bears. We saw a lot of buzz as the NFL draft approached. He was on the same plane as Caleb Williams. They were taking photos together. There was a lot of stuff happening where it looked like Rome Odunze and Caleb Williams were becoming buddies, and it looks like they're going to be buddies there in Chicago because they are going to pair up for at least the next 4 years for the Chicago Bears. Obviously, we know as of right now that landing spot does have a little bit of target competition, so that's going to scare some people a little bit. I've seen Odunze fall a tiny bit in drafts as well. You see DJ Moore, Keenan Allen. These names kind of worry you, but you have to think about this long term. This is a different looking Chicago Bears offense than it has been in years past. We can't take the Justin Fields days and make that be what we think the Caleb Williams days will be. They will be very different offenses. You also have to look at, in the future, just 1 year away from now, Keenan Allen is scheduled to be a free agent. Also, the year after that, DJ Moore is going to be a free agent. So in 2 years' time, both of those receiving options are going to need new contracts. I don't expect both of them to get new contracts in Chicago. The most likely scenario here is that Keenan Allen plays with the Bears here in 2024. And then in 2025, it is just DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. And Rome Odunze by then could very well be the number 1 wide receiver in this offense. So don't let the landing spot scare you. There is more than meets the eye with this landing spot. And I think he could have been in contention for the number 2 overall wide receiver prospect in this draft. I love Rome Odunze. Very excited to keep him here as my wide receiver 3. And I think he's going to be very good for the Chicago Bears here for the future. Now, as my wide receiver 2, it is going to be Malik Nabers for the New York Giants. He was drafted round 1, pick 6. There was rumors potentially of the Giants wanting to trade up and go get a quarterback. Apparently they made offers to go get Drake May at number 3. Didn't happen. They didn't take McCarthy. They didn't do the quarterback transition there at 6. Instead, they go and get a number 1 wide receiver for this offense, and it is much needed in New York. When you look at the depth chart before Malik Nabers shows up, it was Jalen Hyatt, Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, a whole bunch of guys that really haven't done too much at the NFL level. And I think Malik Nabers, he's going to step in and probably get 130, 140 targets year 1. Now, there is a big elephant in the room, and that elephant is going to be Daniel Jones. Now, obviously, Daniel Jones hasn't necessarily proven that he can support a number 1 wide receiver, but in the same argument, you can also argue that Daniel Jones has never had a number 1 wide receiver. We're going to find out right now this year whether it is the chicken or the egg, or whether it is Daniel Jones or the number 1 wide receiver. That is going to be the experiment in 2024. And I've said it before, Malik Nabers is super talented, a very, very good wide receiver. I think this is going to be similar to that situation of Drake London in Atlanta, at least for his first or second year with the Falcons. If Daniel Jones takes a step forward, that will not remain true, but I do think it may take a quarterback change, a veteran quarterback coming in next year for the New York Giants, for Malik Nabers to be fully unlocked. And the free agent quarterback class next year is riddled with a ton of veterans that could come in and support a guy like Malik Nabers. So don't be disappointed in Malik if he doesn't perform at a super high level for your teams in year 1. But with that being said, he is still going to see a ton of opportunity this year. So take it for what it is and don't get too worried about the landing spot for Malik Nabers. And then last but not least, coming in as my wide receiver 1 in a tier of his own, Marvin Harrison Jr. He goes round 1, pick 4 to the Arizona Cardinals. And this is a guy who is going to be in the same conversation as Jamar Chase, as Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, probably by this time next year. Obviously, being able to go to the Arizona Cardinals, I had this as one of the best landing spots possible. We all kind of expected them to take a wide receiver because the depth chart before the draft was Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, Zach Pascal. there was nobody here. 19% of their targets had been vacated. They moved on from Hollywood Brown. We obviously haven't seen them have a true number one ever since they moved on from DeAndre Hopkins. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to see 140 plus targets as a rookie. This is a guy who very well could break the rookie wide receiver records again. We just saw Puka Nacua do it last year. We've seen Jefferson do it in years past. I think that is the type of trajectory for a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. And if that's not exciting enough, he is probably one of the safest wide receiver prospects that we have ever seen come out. I think he is going to be dynamite for our Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters, and a guy that I would be trying to get by all means necessary if I can do it. I've seen some people being able to trade up into that 102 spot. If you can do that for a fair price, all hands on deck, go get Marvin Harrison Jr. He is going to be a superstar at the next level, and that is why he is my wide receiver 1 in this class. So there you have it, my top 10 rookie wide receivers after the NFL draft. This is how I am viewing them going into the 2024 season, assuming nothing major changes. But if you guys did enjoy today's video, go ahead and hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. I am going to be doing the running backs on Friday, so make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel and hit that notification bell so that way you guys can see when that video comes out and you can get my top 10 running backs as well. And also make sure you guys are a member of our Discord. We do have a free Discord linked in the description. We are doing a trade review show on Sunday, so go submit your Dynasty Fantasy Football trades in there. We will review them on our trade show on Sunday. With all of that being said, I will see you guys on our next video. But until then, peace out.